Experts David McEwen and Brian Sobel. We want to begin here with the gubernatorial race in California. Gavin Newsom, a Democrat, versus Republican John Cox. Gavin Newsom is expected, according to the polls, is expected to win, but they're both touching on a number of key issues here. Gavin Newsom mostly focusing on homelessness and affordability, and then, of course, John Cox also kind of talking about how expensive the state of California is and the repeal of the gas tax. And so he's focusing on issues that I feel like a lot of Californians are also feeling as well. What are we thinking, Brian, with this particular race?
This is not going to be the marquee race of the night nationally. Right. I think Gavin Newsom takes it pretty easily. I'll even be interested in by what percentage he takes it. Not to say John Cox didn't run a nice campaign. It's just a very blue state, and it's very hard to separate yourself from what people in California want in terms of all these issues you mentioned and several others. And so it'll be interesting to see how big the margin of victory is tonight. But this propels Gavin Newsom into the national spotlight, where he has been to some extent, but now he's got portfolio, governor of California.
And he's also been an outspoken opponent of President Trump.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Right. Mentioned it in his ads. Everything about, I don't like Donald Trump and we're going to fight Donald Trump, but that's the theme.
David, do you think that's Gavin Newsom's mandate, of assuming he pulls out a victory tonight? Is that his mandate from the voters in California? We want you to push back against the Trump agenda?
Look, he becomes spokesperson #1 along with U.S. Senator Kamala Harris against the Trump administration. Every California politician tripping over him or herself to become the center of anti-Trump here. Now, Gavin Newsom is able to do that as governor. He's able to talk about health care, immigration, security, housing, homelessness, all of these key issues, and he's able to bend the arc of the party towards him. And that'll be important because when he's flying back and forth to Washington, D.C., the middle of the country would be places he'd want to stop.
Let me ask you, though, about John Cox, businessman from San Diego. I mean, in terms of his messaging, he focused in on the high cost of living here in California, and he tried to pin that, blame that on Democrats, including Gavin Newsom. It seems like a message that would have resonated more.
If he had maybe a better charged campaign, not so much the message, but in terms of the retail politics, hitting some of those key areas and grabbing the independent voters, because as Brian talked about, so many voters in this California blue and moving Democratic and already involved to be anti-Trump themselves, that campaign and its message was going to be somewhat blunted, and he has to kind of cut through that. He never did.
Well, and then think about one other thing. If you're talking about money, energy by volunteers and supporters and everything else, John Cox didn't have that, and he never was going to have that. And that's the difference in a race like this. This is a race that is propelling somebody we know who's a household name in California, in Gavin Newsom, to a place where he is now, again, going to be elevated to national status.
This is the launching pad.
Yeah.
It is.
And Brian, you're talking about money, and we've got a lot of important state races to talk about. I want to bring up the race for state superintendent, Tony Thurmond, Marshall Tuck, both Democrats here, both kind of sharing some common interests in a lot of key issues when it comes to education in the state. But I actually sat down and spoke with both candidates, and Tony Thurmond said, this race is getting really ugly with the attack ads, especially for a state superintendent race. But we're talking about $50 million raised between both candidates for a state superintendent race.
Well, yes, and I'll let the professor dig in on that particular race, but I'll point out that there are races for Congress in California, in Southern California, 5 in particular, where over $30 million have been spent in those races alone. Wow. So there's just tons of money oozing out all over this election, all over this country, by the way.
You don't expect that, though, with
well, and you don't. But if you look at this kind of lieutenant governor's race, superintendent of public instruction, insurance commissioner, as you look kind of down ballot, there are folks that are looking to kind of cut and make their way to the next level, kind of like what Gavin Newsom did. So you certainly see this with Marshall Tuck and Tony Thurmond. The question is, that particular race, with all of that spending, it has to go negative. Voters are negatively mobilized. They vote in an angry way. That's what a midterm is about. So it's not a surprise that that race like that should be both expensive, ugly, and really go down into a place that's much more difficult for voters to identify how to go.
All right, let's talk about Senator Dianne Feinstein. She is, of course, a favorite to win re-election over State Senator Kevin De Leon. He sort of, argued for a new voice, a new vision in Washington, given the amount of time that Senator Feinstein has been in the Senate. Any chance that resonates enough to
No, Dianne Feinstein is re-elected tonight.
call it.
You know, yeah, just
worth a shot.
Hate to do it. I mean, for all the people yet to vote, go vote and vote for who you
still vote.
Right,
yeah,
vote for who you
disclaimer on the bottom of the screen, right?
But I mean, at the end of the day, Dianne Feinstein's still very popular in California. There are some negatives, clearly. I think a lot of party folks were very disappointed in her performance during the Kavanaugh hearings, as an example. But I don't think they wanted to hold it against her enough to take a chance on De Leon.
And this is also the top two system, right? This is the top two system, Democrat on Democrat violence, which is something that we didn't know that we would see, and this is actually what's happened, and it kind of splits the party and reflects that.
If it's a tight race, does she get a message there from the voters in California?
Yes, if it's a tight race. We don't expect a tight race, but if it is a tight race, there is certainly a message being sent to her. But look, she's also a giant in Washington, and that's important for California today.
Well, and one other thing is she's not running again, so send her a message if you want, but this is the last dance.
Fair point. Okay. Thanks for your insight, both of you.
Absolutely.
Brian Sobel, David McEwen. Thanks for being here.